William Earl Moult. William Earl Moult, a 40-year-old mortgage broker from Lantana, Florida, was last seen on the evening of November 7, 1997. That night, Bill visited a local nightclub, where he largely kept to himself. Witnesses noted he didn't seem intoxicated when he left the club around 11 p.m. However, after he departed, he was never seen again, sparking a decades-long mystery surrounding his disappearance. Before getting into his car, he called his girlfriend to tell her he would be home shortly. William never made it to their home, however. After a while, his girlfriend got worried and called the police to report him missing. The police started their investigation by going to the nightclub he was last seen. There, they found no sign of William or his car. The police questioned a few witnesses that saw him during the evening, but no one knew where he went after he drove off. Despite the police and the family's best efforts in finding William, there was never really any leads or explanation for his disappearance. For over 2 decades, the whereabouts of William Earl Moult would remain a mystery. Then in 2019, a local property surveyor from Lantana was busy browsing Google Maps, satellite images of his neighborhood, when he spotted a car partially submerged in a pond behind a nearby house. The pond is in the 37100 block of Moon Bay Circle in the Grand Isles, a housing complex in Wellington, Florida. After the man spotted the car, he went to the owner of the neighboring house, Barry Fay. Barry never saw anything in the pond in the 14 months he lived there. Even when the water was low, he never noticed anything. He spent hours in his backyard working on landscaping and planting pineapples. Barry then used a drone he got from a neighbor to fly over the pond. There it was, plain as day, a white car under the water behind his backyard. He reported it to the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office on August 28, 2019. Shortly thereafter, the car was lifted out of the pond. The car was William's white 1994 Saturn SL. His remains were sadly found inside. The property had been in development at the time of William's disappearance, and the car went undiscovered throughout the rest of the construction. The car had been visible on Google Earth since 2007, but no one noticed it until recently. Many of the neighborhood's residents are still in disbelief that there had been an entire car with a body underneath the pond for so long. A police spokesman told the BBC, "You can't determine what happened that many years ago, what transpired. All we know is that he went missing off the face of the earth, and now he has been discovered." William's family can now finally find some semblance of closure, though the circumstances leading to how he ended up in the pond may forever remain a mystery. Moving on to the next case. Joette Marie Smith. Joette Marie Smith, a 33-year-old woman, was found in the San Lorenzo River in Santa Cruz County, California, around 11:10 a.m. on March 29, 1983, by a man playing with his dog. She had been strangled, and investigators collected several items of evidence at the crime scene. Joette was the well-loved owner of the Buffalo Gals restaurant in Ben Lomond, California, located about 30 miles southwest of San Jose. Her murder sparked a significant investigation as authorities worked to piece together the circumstances of her death and identify the perpetrator. She was last seen sometime before midnight on March 27, 1983, around 36 hours before her body was discovered. Witnesses told investigators that, on the night of her disappearance, Joette had first enjoyed a quiet night of eating popcorn watching the TV series The Thorn Birds with her roommate, Rachel Devereaux. Joette and Rachel shared a studio apartment just across the street from Joette's restaurant. Rachel said that she and Joette stayed up for the 11 o'clock news, after which Joette made some phone calls and Rachel retired for the evening. When Rachel woke up around 3 a.m., Joette was not there, which wasn't atypical for her. It wasn't unusual for her to go out. She would often go over to the restaurant, Rachel said in a 1983 interview. According to witnesses, Joette walked to one nearby bar, found that it was already closed and walked to another, Henfling's bar, which was also closing. There she purchased a pack of cigarettes, but refused a ride home from a woman's server she knew, telling the woman she would walk home because it was a pleasant evening. She never made it home. For the next several years, detectives interviewed dozens of people and investigated several leads and tips, but no viable suspect was identified. In 1988, there was movement in the case. Investigators identified a suspect named Eric David Drummond, a man with an extensive history of violent crimes, including assault convictions in California and Nevada. Authorities believe Drummond had once asked Joette out on a date while at her restaurant, but she rebuffed his advances. In the days after, Joette's life was taken. Drummond abruptly left California, according to Santa Cruz County officials. While there was circumstantial information tying Drummond to the crime, no criminal case could be brought against him without further physical evidence. Authorities reopened Joette's case early in 2022. They took a fresh look at her clothing and used scientific technology that was not available in the 1980s. From there, experts were able to develop a male suspect's DNA profile. In August of 2022, authorities directly obtained a DNA sample from the now 64-year-old Eric Drummond and determined his DNA matched the sample from the crime scene evidence. Before investigators could arrest Eric Drummond, they learned that he had taken his own life. The sheriff's office came out with a statement saying, "Unfortunately, while the final investigative steps were taken to obtain an arrest warrant, Drummond chose to end his own life in the hills of Sierra County." While Drummond will never face criminal charges or a jury of his peers, the sheriff's office is confident that the evidence in this case would support a conviction of Drummond for taking the life of Joette Smith. The sheriff's office extends our condolences to the family and friends of Joette Smith. We wish to remind the community of Santa Cruz that the sheriff's office will continue to investigate each of our cold cases. Friends describe Joette as a remarkable woman who was hospitable, happy, and full of vigor. Born and raised in a Polish Catholic family in Nebraska, she moved to Santa Cruz about 10 years before she lost her life. Moving on to the next case. Sarah Roberts. In 1994, tragedy struck in Harlem, New York City, when 57-year-old Sarah Roberts and her 25-year-old daughter, Sharon Roberts, were discovered strangled inside their apartment. Sharon, who had developmental disabilities, was found by a home care attendant hired to assist her. The front door of their residence was unlocked, with no signs of forced entry. Inside, Sarah was found lifeless on her bed, while Sharon's body lay on the floor with a wool stocking around her neck. Investigators noted that a cassette video recorder and several $100s in cash were missing, pointing to a potential motive of robbery. Investigators collected forensic evidence from the crime scene. Recently, with advances in DNA technology, investigators were able to create a DNA profile of the culprit thanks to DNA found under the victim's fingernails and cigarette butts left at the crime scene. This led them to 64-year-old Larry Atkinson. Atkinson dated the home health care aide that cared for Sharon. He is still with her to this day. Atkinson also lived in the same building as Sharon and Sarah. He is a career criminal and has a total of 28 prior arrests and served prison time on 5 separate state convictions. His time behind bars dates to 1985, when he was sentenced to 2 years in prison on an assault conviction and was paroled in 1987. Atkinson also did state time on assault, drug, and attempted robbery. He was last paroled in 2013 after serving another 2 years on an attempted drug sale conviction. On January 23, 2023, Larry Atkinson was arrested by the New York Police Department Bronx Cold Case Squad and charged with taking the lives of both Sharon and Sarah Roberts. He is ill with cancer and is awaiting arraignment in Manhattan from a hospital bed. The home healthcare aide, Celeste Cornelius, stood by Atkinson. "I know he didn't do it," she said outside their Harlem apartment. "I don't want you to misquote me, but I know he did not do it. I don't care about the DNA. None of that mess. He didn't do it." Their neighbor, Juliet Wilson, said Atkinson and Cornelius have lived together in the building for at least 20 years, describing him as a heavy-set man who uses a walker. "He's a nice guy. They don't fight about anything," a witness remarked, expressing shock at the events. "This whole thing is surprising to me. The reasons behind the actions remain unclear." but investigators have considered robbery as a potential motive since a cassette video recorder and several $100s in cash were stolen from the Roberts' apartment. Tanya and Ottman. On the morning of July 1, 2007, deputies from the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office responded to a grisly scene at the Nature's Trail mobile home park in Thonotosassa, Florida. Jonathan Burns, a resident and co-owner of the park, had called 911 to report being stabbed during an altercation with a tenant. Upon arrival, deputies discovered the lifeless body of 41-year-old Tanya and Ottman outside her rented mobile home. Tanya had suffered a deep laceration to her neck and 4 stab wounds to her chest. Her body was found lying on her back near the mobile home. About 29 feet from her body, investigators found suspected blood near a trash bin, and blood leading back to the Burns home. Investigators found a bloody knife inside. Forensics tests at the time showed that the blood on the ground and the knife matched Burns's DNA profile. An autopsy concluded that Tanya lost her life from stab wounds to the chest that penetrated her heart and lungs. Burns, who was 43 years old at the time, had 2 wounds to his abdomen. He told investigators that Tanya had stabbed him. He was taken to Tampa General Hospital for surgery for 2 wounds to his mid-abdomen. Detectives also said both of his arms appeared to have scratches with small lacerations on his fingers. When detectives learned that Toynge used a walker and a wheelchair, had a hard time getting around, and could be unsteady on her feet, they started to doubt that Burns acted in self-defense. The case was presented to the state attorney's office, which concluded there was insufficient evidence to refute Burns' version of the events. Then, in 2021, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit started revisiting the case. On January 14 of 2022, a detective went back to Jonathan Burns' home in the park and interviewed him about the events surrounding Toynge's stabbing. Burns told the detectives he had been drinking heavily that night, and Toynge started yelling at him while he walked to the laundry room to close it. He said he walked over to her mobile home and Tanya then punched him in the stomach. Burns said he later realized he was bleeding. He said Toynge was not armed with any type of weapon and never took his knife, but he thinks she stabbed him. More than a week after that interview, a witness contacted the sheriff's office saying she had information on a cold case from 2007. During an interview with the detective, the witness said that Burns had approached her in the mobile home park after the detective on January 14, and he told her he knows he did something wrong and he wanted to face it. The witness said Burns told her he knew Toynge was disabled at the time. The witness also said Burns gave her a signed letter containing an account of what happened, which she passed on to the detective on January 25 of 2022. 2 days later, the witness contacted the detective again. This time, the witness said Burns had approached her and told her he wrote the letter as if he was acting in self-defense, as he figured he would get less time. The witness said Burns told her that Tanya had gotten what she deserved, and he did not feel bad about it. The next day, on January 28, the witness gave the detective a second statement written and signed by Burns that contradicted the first statement. The witness and her son confronted Burns, telling him that there were contradictions between the letters and what he was telling her verbally. Burns then wrote a third statement that he handed to the witness, and she gave it to the detective. In the third statement, Burns claimed he had stabbed himself in the stomach after the incident because that would be good for self-defense. He also claimed he saw Toynge while walking to the laundry room, so he returned home to get his knife before walking over to talk to her. Burns said an argument led to them fighting over the knife, and when Toynge tried to go home, he stabbed her several times and cut her throat. Burns ended the letter with an admission that he didn't like Toya and intended to hurt her that night. "This was a terrible tragedy that I am responsible for. I wish I could change it," Jonathan Burns stated in a confession that was consistent with evidence gathered at the crime scene. Investigators also matched a latent fingerprint on one of his written statements to him. This critical discovery led to the arrest of 58-year-old Jonathan Burns on February 2, 2022, at his residence in the same mobile home park he co-owned. Following his arrest, a Tampa judge set Burns' bond at $50,000. He remains in custody, awaiting trial for the tragic incident. Moving on to the next case. Christopher Dansby. Christopher Dansby's disappearance on May 18, 1989, remains one of New York City's most heartbreaking mysteries. At just 2 years old, Christopher was spending time at the Martin Luther King Jr. Towers playground in Manhattan with several relatives while his mother briefly left to get food. When she returned about half an hour later, her son was gone. Despite immediate efforts by the family and authorities to search for him, Christopher was nowhere to be found. His disappearance was puzzling. There were no witnesses who could explain what happened or where he went. Over the years, the case has seen little progress, and many theories have been proposed, but no answers have surfaced. As of now, Christopher's case remains unsolved, leaving his family devastated and searching for answers. Her relatives told her that at last saw Christopher playing with a red ball. Christopher did not bring a red ball with him to the park, and his mom did not find it while looking for him. It disappeared with Christopher. A 7-year-old boy who knew Christopher told police that he saw him walking later in the day. According to this boy, Christopher was accompanied by an unidentified African-American male with braided hair. Christopher's disappearance is eerily similar to the disappearance of 1-year-old Shane Walker, who disappeared from the same playground in August of 1989, just a few months after Christopher went missing. Both Christopher and Shane lived in the same apartment building, disappeared on the same day of the week, at roughly the same time, and they were both seen playing with the same 2 kids when they went missing. The police believe that the boys' cases are connected to a black market baby ring operation, and that 1-month-old Andre Bryant, who was abducted from Brooklyn also in 1989, was a victim of that as well. Christopher was last seen wearing a blue jacket, a floral printed shirt, blue jeans, and green and white sneakers. Has a birthmark shaped like a figure 8 on his back and a burn scar on his thigh. There were rumors that Christopher's mom had sold him for drugs or that he was taken because of a debt she owed. Christopher's mom admitted that she used drugs, but had been in recovery for years by the time her son disappeared, and that she did not owe money to anyone. Christopher's family took a lot of data tests, but the results that came back were inconclusive. If you have any information on the missing boys mentioned in this video, you can contact the New York Housing Police Department at 212-876-7100. I know what you guys are thinking. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. Who are those 2 children that both Christopher and Shane were playing with when they disappeared? This is what I found. Shane disappeared on August 10th while his mom sat on a nearby bench. 2 children struck up a conversation with her, a 10-year-old girl and her 5-year-old brother. The 2 children were very eager to play with Shane even though he was so much younger than them. She let the 3 of them play together. A man then went to sit next to her on the bench, and he started conversation with her. He talked to her about a high crime rate in the city. He also mentioned that kids weren't safe in the park and mentioned kidnappings. A man then showed her his scars. She was momentarily distracted, and when she looked back to where her son last was, she saw that he and other 2 children were gone. While searching for Shane, she came across the 2 children re-entering the playground. They said that they left their son in the park. The 2 children were extensively questioned by the police, and was confirmed that they were the same 2 children who had been playing with Christopher just before he went missing. The identities of these 2 children were never revealed, most likely because they were minors back then. I cannot help but wonder if they were used to lure young toddlers away from their guardians. It could, of course, just be a big coincidence. I could not find any information on a man that distracted Shane's mom, and if he was ever questioned. It is also unclear if he matched the description of the man that was seen of Christopher by the 7-year-old boy. The disappearance of Christopher Dansby, along with the cases of Shane Walker and Andre Bryant, remains a tragic and unresolved mystery. In the wake of Christopher's vanishing, the city responded by offering a $30,000 reward for any information that could help lead to his whereabouts. A massive search effort was launched, which included the distribution of countless missing persons posters across New York, and a door-to-door investigation of all 1,800 apartments in the Martin Luther King Jr. Towers where Christopher was last seen. Police also enlisted the help of sniffer dogs to search nearby sewers and abandoned buildings in hopes of finding any trace of the young boy. Over the years, authorities followed up on around 500 reported sightings of Christopher, but none of these leads led to any concrete information. Despite these extensive efforts, the fates of Christopher, Shane, and Andre remain unknown. The unanswered questions continue to haunt their families, and the search for answers remains ongoing. Moving on to the next case. Lorraine Stahl. In May of 1974, Connecticut State Police received a tip that led them to investigate a home on Cheviot Road in Ledyard, Connecticut. Upon searching the property and surrounding area, investigators discovered two decomposed bodies in shallow graves several hundred feet behind the house. The man was identified as Gustavus Lee Carmichael, a convicted serial bank robber who had escaped from custody. Carmichael had committed multiple bank robberies across the country, and in 1970, he was apprehended for stealing $60,000 from a bank in New Jersey. The woman found with him was not immediately identified, but her connection to Carmichael's activities and escape was part of the investigation. The discovery of their remains raised further questions about Carmichael's actions and the circumstances surrounding his death. Additionally, throughout his lifetime, he faced convictions for various offenses such as burglary, kidnapping, attempted burglary, grand larceny, assault and battery, and armed robbery. However, in October of 1970, during his transfer from a Massachusetts jail to a federal court in Hartford, Connecticut, he and another inmate managed to escape custody, prompting the FBI to issue a federal warrant for his arrest. While on the run, he would eventually meet a woman, and they began to go by the names Dirk and Lorraine Stahl. They were staying at the home of Richard DeFreitas and Donald Brandt, fellow bank robbers. DeFreitas and Brandt possessed several safe houses utilized to harbor fugitives evading law enforcement. Nonetheless, the woman, Lorraine Stahl, confided in DeFreitas' wife that she was afraid of the lifestyle they were leading. When DeFreitas learned about her fears, he told Brandt, and they decided to eliminate Carmichael and the woman, fearing that her potential capture could lead to the exposure of their illicit operations. Given the perceived difficulty of eliminating just the woman without Carmichael's likely intervention, they opted to murder Carmichael as well. Investigators believed Carmichael and the woman were killed on December 31, 1970, 4 years before being found. DeFreitas and Brandt fatally shot Carmichael and the woman, then dumped their bodies, which remained undiscovered for more than 3 years. Richard DeFreitas and Donald Brandt were eventually convicted of the murders and have since died. Even though the man was identified, the woman who was shot was never given a name, as she had used an alias that was never verified. Before going by the name of Lorraine Stahl, she was known to use the names Connie and Sandy, and was known to drive around in a 1964 green Oldsmobile with either Massachusetts or Maine plates. The car was eventually found dumped in Hartford with a Maine registration sticker on the license plate. She was also known to have possibly worked in New York City. After the bodies were discovered, police found clothes and jewelry with the woman's remains, including a tan leather wet-look vest, a gold or tan sweater, a brown tweed skirt, and a brown pair of so-called granny boots. She was also wearing a pendant and various rings, according to the state police. She had on her a class ring, which had the letters JHSN inscribed on it alongside the initials ILN and the year 1917. Lorraine Stahl would go unidentified for 50 years. Her case was entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System in 2011 and CODIS in 2012, but she remained unidentified. Then in 2022, DNA samples were sent to Orthram Labs, and they were able to build a DNA profile of the victim. In January of 2024, the profile helped to find a connection with the victim's sister. They also found out that the victim had a daughter, and she provided DNA samples. Soon Lorraine Stahl was identified as Linda Sue Childers. Childers was born September 4, 1946, and was originally from Louisville, Kentucky. Her sister and daughter were notified of her identification, and the case was considered solved after more than 50 years. Moving on to the next case. Kathy Krausnick. Kathy Krausnick, a 29-year-old woman from Brighton, New York, was found dead in her home on February 19, 1982. Her husband, James, arrived at a neighbor's house with a look of terror, claiming that someone had taken Kathy's life. When officers from the Brighton Police Department arrived at the home on Del Rio Drive, they discovered Kathy's lifeless body in the bed she shared with her husband. The circumstances surrounding her death were initially unclear, and it quickly became apparent that foul play was involved. The case would go on to capture attention as investigators worked to piece together the events leading to Kathy's tragic death. An axe was embedded in her head. It appeared as if her life was taken while she was sleeping. James told investigators that he left Kathy and their daughter at 6:30 a.m. and drove to Eastman Kodak, where he worked as an economist. He said when he came home after work, he found Kathy's body in their bed and the home in disarray. He then went over to the neighbor and asked him to call 911. Investigators took a close look at the axe that was used to commit the crime. The handle had been wiped clean of fingerprints. Despite some investigators believing James Krausnick was responsible, nothing concrete tied him to the crime, and the case went unsolved for years. At one point, Ed Larrabee confessed, while in prison, to taking Kathy's life. Detectives deemed Larrabee a serial confessor. His claims did not match any of the evidence, and he was ultimately ruled out as a suspect. The case was reopened in 2015 after officials with the Monroe County District Attorney's Office reviewed the case with the Brighton Police Department and the FBI. The County Crime Lab and renowned medical examiner, Dr. Michael Baden, also assisted in the investigation. Then, in November 2019, James Krausnick was arrested by officers with the Brighton Police Department and charged with taking Kathy's life. He entered a plea of not guilty and was released after posting a $100,000 bail. Brighton Police Chief David Catholdi said that after thousands of hours of investigation, detectives found no evidence that anybody else was in the home other than James and the couple's daughter. No other physical evidence at the scene, including DNA, points to anyone except James Krausnick Jr., Catholt said in announcing James' arrest. What we did not find was any evidence that points to anyone else that was in that home. There's no boogeyman out there. There was no outside party in the house during the commission of that crime, he added. State Supreme Court Justice Charles Chano Jr. announced that the trial will start on August 29, 2022. James Krausnick's defense attorney highlighted that the case against his client was a circumstantial one. Prosecutors argued that Krausnick should be found guilty because no other person could have committed the crime. Dr. Baden said that it was his opinion that Kathy's life was taken between 9 p.m. the previous evening and 4 a.m., hours before Krausnick left for work. Attorneys also focused on the theory that Krausnick decided to end Kathy's life after she discovered he had lied about his background. He began working at Eastman Kodak on the pretense that he held a PhD, though investigators later learned he hadn't earned his doctorate. Prosecutors also said that the crime scene was staged to look like a burglary and that the items of evidence, including the axe handle, had been wiped clean of fingerprints. On September 26, 2022, 70-year-old James Krausnick was found guilty of taking his wife's life. Krausnick is scheduled to appear before New York State Supreme Court Justice Charles Chano on November 7, 2022 for sentencing. Assistant District Attorney Patrick Gallagher said, "I am proud to be part of the team who found justice for Kathleen Krausnick 40 years after James Krausnick took an axe from his garage and used it to strike her in the head while she was asleep. It has been one of the greatest pleasures of my career to get to know Kathy's family and to be able to help in securing justice for their loved one." Kathy's father, 95-year-old Robert Schlosser, spoke with reporters following the guilty verdict. "I've got one thing to do," Robert said. "I'm going to get my daughter's body removed from the Krausnick plot and move back with her mother and brother." Robert explained he wanted to live long enough to see justice prevail before bringing Kathy's body back to Michigan. "My wife passed away 4 years ago," he told reporters. "She didn't make it." Moving on to the next case. Jennifer Doherty. On February 11, 2010, a truck driver traveling through Greensburg, Pennsylvania, noticed something odd on the otherwise quiet streets. As he passed the Greensburg-Salem Middle School, his attention was drawn to a tipped-over trash can. Though it would have been simpler to ignore it, his curiosity got the better of him. When he investigated, he discovered a gruesome sight. Inside the trash can lay the badly mangled and bloody corpse of a woman. While he couldn't make sense of what he was seeing, he immediately dialed 911 and the police rushed to the scene to inspect the remains of what seemed like a nightmarish act. On their arrival, the cops saw the body haphazardly stuffed into the dumpster with several knife stab wounds. Besides, they shockingly discovered that the woman had several bruises on her, indicating she was badly beaten by her attacker before they had killed her. The corpse also looked mysteriously out of place in a dumpster outside a middle school, suggesting that it was not the site of the murder, but the site of disposal. While searching the battered body of the woman, the police found a note in the back pocket of her pants. The condition of the body completely betrayed the contents of the note, and the only shred of truth it carried was the name of the unfortunate victim, Jennifer. What really happened to this woman? How horrifying were her final moments before she ended up getting killed in such a terrible manner? A little more scrutiny enabled the cops to track down the parents of the now deceased Jennifer Daughtry, who were then called in to identify her body. The parents, Richard and Denise Daughtry, were shocked out of their wits on seeing that their sweet daughter was taken away from them in such a vicious manner. They informed the police that Jennifer was 30 years old. However, her intellectual and psychological challenges had limited her mental age to that of a 12 to 14-year-old girl. Born on November 8, 1979 in Latrobe of Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, Jennifer was a bright soul who had a very warm and welcoming vibe. While she got bullied by several kids in her school days because of her mental challenges, her personality allowed her to befriend several likable companions. On that fateful day, while talking to Jennifer's parents, the cops surprisingly came to learn that she was a resident of Mount Pleasant. This made them question what she was doing in Greensburg and who really took her life. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. The Daughtries told the police that their girl regularly visited Greensburg for her medical appointments. She was also taking life skill lessons at the West Place Clubhouse in Greensburg, which also involved getting trained to become a mechanic. This time, however, she had arrived in the city to meet a new group of friends for a sleepover. Jennifer had met this group of 6 people via Angela Marinucci, whom she bumped into while taking her lessons at the West Place Clubhouse. Both girls hit it off very well, and Angela introduced Jennifer to her friends, Ricky Smyrns, Melvin Knight, Amber Menninger, Robert Masters, and Peggy Miller. While Jennifer had been battling with mental challenges, surprisingly, she wasn't alone anymore. Everyone in the new gang of friends had their own cognitive challenges, and so they stuck close to each other. Many of them had developed these issues because of bad childhoods trampled with negative experiences. Such relatable issues helped Jennifer to quickly bond with the group and be happy in the company of others like her, who were also trying to live despite their psychological struggles. Jennifer's parents showed complete trust in this new group of friends since they had observed that their daughter was very happy with them. Before going out on February 10, 2010, Jennifer had left a note for her mother saying that she would be back home after the sleepover by the next day afternoon. In fact, she even mentioned the contact details of all 6 friends to reach out to in case of any unforeseen emergencies. Sadly, these words turned out to be her last bits of communication with her parents, and the first lead in the investigation of her murder. According to the Daughtry, something must have happened after the time Jennifer got off the bus so as to reach the house where the fun getaway was planned. The police decided to meet this group in good faith and ask if they knew anything about this gruesome murder. But little did they know that they would discover something completely sinister and unbelievable. From the outside, the house where Jennifer was supposed to meet her friends seemed rather dull and ordinary. It still had some lights on its exterior, suggesting that the Christmas decorations hadn't been taken off. But when the cops walked in through the door, they discovered that the house, which adorned a semi-festive look, was plagued with the stench of gore and blood. The house occupied by Jennifer's friends turned out to be the crime scene where she was badly beaten and killed, with almost every corner of the house reeking of the grim nature of the incident. The cops apprehended all 6 in the group, who didn't try very hard to deny what had happened in the face of all the glaring evidence in the house. While just a glimpse of Jennifer's body screamed torture, the evidence found in the house of the Greensburg 6 confirmed that she was badly humiliated before being killed. In the house, the police found all the objects that were used to hurt the helpless Jennifer, along with the murder weapon, which was a kitchen knife that eventually ended her final breath. The cops relentlessly questioned everyone and asked them what happened during the night of the sleepover on February 10, 2010. The statements from the Greenberg 6 revealed that the sleepover was just a trap for Jennifer and that her punishment was pre-planned instead of being something accidental. They also learned that the mastermind behind this heinous crime was none other than the youngest of them all, Angela Marinucci, who was also Jennifer's close friend. Just when Jennifer crossed their doorstep, the group put their plans into action, and they suddenly began hitting her. Jennifer was quite confused at the time, since this wasn't the welcome she was expecting. Why did this new group of friends she had trusted so much suddenly turn hostile? What sick intentions might have motivated these 6 people to mercilessly hurt a mentally challenged friend and eventually take her life? Jennifer's phone and purse were immediately confiscated by the group, who began their grueling torture session that would go on for 36 long hours. They tore her purse and poured several fluids into it. Angela and Amber initiated the physical assault and beat Jennifer up with several objects. They took turns as they bruised her with several items, including a sturdy pair of crutches, a vacuum cleaner hose, a towel bar, and a 2-liter lemonade bottle. The duo was later joined by the others, who kicked Jennifer repeatedly, crushing her belly and her chest. The badly bruised Jennifer was also forced to gulp down several undrinkable fluids, like cooking oil, nail polish, detergent, urine, and even made to eat fleas. All of these were poured onto her head, followed by oatmeal and spices. Jennifer retaliated against the assaults, as she tried to throw her limbs around to attack her assailants. Unfortunately, Jennifer ended up choosing the wrong target by hitting Amber hard in the stomach. The group said that Amber was pregnant and escalated their assault on Jennifer after tying her with Christmas lights and decorations to prevent her from standing up to them again. The group shaved Jennifer's head and smeared her face with nail polish while continuing to thrash her. Unable to fight, Jennifer tried begging her attackers for mercy. The group neither stopped nor explained while she became the victim of their sadism. Instead, Melvin Knight took off Jennifer's clothes and forced himself on the heavily bruised victim while everyone else watched. After Melvin was done, they forced Jennifer into the bathroom to have a shower, citing the trouble they were having with her stench. While Jennifer thought that her captors were done with her, you would discover next that she couldn't have been more wrong. The thrashing instantly resumed, and Jennifer's mini illusion was instantly shattered. But things did come to a stop afterwards, since the Greensburg 6 got bored of constantly beating Jennifer to a pulp. The group then decided to vote to either let Jennifer go on the expectation that she would remain quiet, or to kill her and get rid of her body. Jennifer begged her supposed friends to set her free. But the next morning, February 11th, she learned that all 6 had unanimously voted to end her life. Before killing her, the group somehow thought that making Jennifer write a note would shield them whenever her body was found. For reasons unknown, the group made Jennifer take several antibiotics, painkillers, and sleeping pills before Ricky Smirms asked Melvin to stab her in the chest. This could either be due to an unexpected return of their conscience, or an attempt to prolong Jennifer's suffering using medicines. The latter stands more probable, since they didn't spare the life of the already tortured Jennifer. Thus, any consideration of the Greensburg 6's empathy towards their unfortunate victim was completely out of the question. Instead, Melvin plunged a knife into Jennifer's body thrice, striking her chest and her throat. He later checked on her to find that she was still alive and slashed her wrist to end Jennifer's life. The group didn't immediately dispose of Jennifer's body. Angela Marinucci asked the group to prop the dead body up and wrap it in Christmas lighting to get a dazzling display of their monstrosity. But when the damaged Christmas lights didn't work, the frustrated group stuffed her body in a trash can where it was eventually found. All of this clearly showcased that none of the six had any form of remorse over their actions. But what really made them carry out this torture cum murder? After learning of such a horrifying account, cops cracked down hard on everyone to find out why they made Jennifer suffer so much. The Greensburg Six revealed that Jennifer had developed a crush on Ricky, who was Angela's boyfriend at the time. Moreover, Angela once caught Ricky secretly speaking with Jennifer over the phone. This made her furious with jealousy, following which she decided to punish her new friend for crossing the line and hatched a plan with Amber. Cops found that this flow of romance wasn't one way, as Ricky later revealed that he loved Jennifer as well. Both had confessed their love to each other, and had also been intimate on a few occasions behind Angela's back. This really made the detectives think as to why Ricky participated or even approved of whatever happened with Jennifer. Especially, he could have avoided everything by simply warning Jennifer and asking her not to come for the sleepover. The confession from the other members of the Greensburg Six, especially Peggy Miller and Robert Masters, revealed that Angela was a very dangerous woman, and they were very afraid of her. Peggy and Robert also said they didn't participate in any of the violence, and were willing to cooperate with the police and get a plea deal in court. However, the fear analogy didn't stand true for everyone, especially Melvin Knight, who seemed to have enjoyed torturing and assaulting Jennifer the most. Nevertheless, when things came down to the point for each member to vote, none of them voted to let Jennifer live despite already having made her go through a hellish nightmare. However, the police now had what they needed to get justice for Jennifer Daughtry. The hearing for the case began on November 3, 2010, revealing that Angela, Ricky, and Jennifer had a very complex love triangle, with Ricky being at the center of it all. Angela had actually overheard Ricky speaking with Jennifer when she had heard him saying that he loved her and wanted to marry her. This made Angela fume with rage, since she had been his girlfriend for several years. The state of Pennsylvania had never seen a heinous and violent crime of this degree. On August 3, 2011, when giving the verdict, the court found the charges against Angela serious enough for death penalty. But since she was only 17 at the time of the incident, she ended up receiving life imprisonment without parole for first-degree murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder. Due to certain unrelated developments, her sentence saw some revisions, with the final order coming in May 2022. Angela is now undergoing her sentence, and would be eligible for parole only in 2070. Ricky Smyrns and Melvin Knight, however, received the death penalty on February 28, 2013 and April 12, 2012 respectively. Knight later challenged his sentence in September 2014, stating that the jury was prejudiced towards him, but the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania upheld his sentence twice. Speaking about her judgment on Knight, Pennsylvania Supreme Court's Chief Justice Deborah Todd said that the jury was not biased in its judgment to give the death penalty to Melvin Knight. She instead noted that the decision was made after a thorough examination of a large pool of evidence, which proved Knight and the rest of the Greensburg Six having subjected Jennifer, a mentally challenged woman, to several forms of assault and torture, eventually killing her. Amber Menninger pled guilty to third-degree murder, conspiracy, and kidnapping, though she had initially tried to get some relief citing her pregnancy. Once she found out she could be facing the death penalty, she chose to cooperate as a witness and received a sentence of 40 to 80 years in prison on December 4, 2013. Prior to the trial, Peggy Miller and Robert Masters had already agreed to testify as witnesses. During the trial, Robert revealed that he had almost helped Jennifer in escaping and also returned her clothes while Melvin and Ricky were outside the house, but they returned before Jennifer could flee from the place. The courts, however, noted that neither Peggy nor Roberts chose to inform the police of what happened and only came forward as witnesses to get plea deals. Although they didn't participate in any of the violence, they did help in keeping Jennifer hostage and also voted to kill her. Peggy received a sentence of 35 to 74 years, and Robert got a sentence of 30 to 70 years on March 17, 2014. The accounts of Peggy and Robert also ushered in the need for a law in Pennsylvania to charge anybody witnessing a violent crime and withholding the information from the police with third-degree murder. This law was proposed by Senator Kim Ward in 2012, and he tabled the proposal as Jennifer's law. Speaking at the trial of the murderers of her sister, Joy Buckholder said, "Jennifer was exploited. Her kindness and her handicap made her very vulnerable. She did not have a single mean bone in her body." Jennifer's family also took the blame of their beloved's murder on themselves, since they thought they shouldn't have left Jennifer alone despite knowing that she needed the love, help, and support of someone close at almost all times. The horrifying and gruesome end of Jennifer Doherty really shook one and all concerned from within. Jennifer's parents were especially devastated to know that their daughter was tortured, assaulted, murdered, and hoisted as a trophy in cold blood. To add to their grief, she was killed by the very people she trusted and someone whom she had fallen in love with. The doctors had been thinking of getting Jennifer a place of her own in Greensburg where she could live more independently with a network of reliable friends by her side. The murder of Jennifer Doherty remains one of the most chilling cases, largely due to the brutal and senseless nature of her death at the hands of the Greensburg Six. Evidence suggests that several of the perpetrators had known mental health struggles, which could have influenced their actions. However, it's important to consider whether their mental challenges fully explain their participation in such a horrific act, or if the cruelty and violence they exhibited were rooted in something darker, like a propensity for sadistic behavior. Ultimately, while mental health issues might have played a role, the capacity for such cold-blooded torture and murder seems to stem from deeper, more complex factors. Moving on to the next case. Julianne Williams. Julie Williams, 24, and Laura Winans, 26, embarked on a camping trip along the Appalachian Trail in Shenandoah National Park, Virginia, in May of 1996. The couple, who had met nearly 2 years earlier at With Women, a nonprofit focused on adventure travel for women, shared a deep love for the outdoors. Along with Laura's golden retriever, Taj, the pair set out on May 19, 1996, looking forward to their time in nature. Tragically, their trip would end in a mysterious and unsolved double homicide that left their loved ones and authorities searching for answers. However, they never arrived back home. Nearly 2 weeks later, on May 31, 1996, Thomas Williams, Julie's father, reported his daughter missing after neither of the women's families had heard from them. Park rangers immediately launched the search of the area for the missing couple, and soon they located Julie and Laura's car just north of Skyland Lodge. During the search, Laura's golden retriever, Taj, was found wandering around seemingly unharmed. The next day, rangers came upon a campsite and discovered Julie and Laura's bodies. Laura was found in her tent, gagged with her hands bound with duct tape. Her legs were tied with a pair of thermal underwear. Although partially undressed, there were no outward signs of sexual assault. Subsequent forensic analysis showed that the duct tape gag had previously been used to bind Julie's hands. Julie was found 75 feet from their tent in her sleeping bag. She was naked, gagged, and had her hands bound with duct tape. Investigators noted that unlike Laura, her legs were not tied. While there was no outward evidence of sexual assault, it was suggested that the May 2nd had been tortured, though no specific details were released. Both women died from having their throats slashed with a sharp knife. Determining the time of death was challenging, but the coroner estimated that the deaths occurred between May 26th and May 28th, although some indications suggest that the deaths may have happened the night of May 24th. Photos left behind in the couple's camera offer a glimpse into the final days of Julie and Laura's lives. The women arrived in Shenandoah National Park on May 19, 1996, setting off into the woods of the White Oak Canyon Trail only to return a few days later due to rain. They then hitched a ride with the park ranger and renewed their camping permit before venturing out again. They climbed Hawksville, the highest mountain in Shenandoah, and made their camp that night in a picturesque spot next to a stream near the Appalachian Trail. Surrounded by the peacefulness of nature, it would be shortly after they set up camp that Julie and Laura's lives would come to a vicious and violent end. Given the women's sexual orientation and the brutal and calculated nature of the murders, authorities wondered if they were victims of a hate crime. An incarcerated man named David Dorrell Rice became a suspect in the case. He was known for expressing his hatred toward women and the LGBT community specifically. He was later arrested after an attempted abduction of a female bicyclist in Shenandoah National Park. He would eventually serve a 10-year sentence for the abduction attempt. Investigators continued to look into possible connections between him and the double homicide, and in April of 2002, Rice was indicted on capital murder charges in the Shenandoah National Park killings. In the statement of facts, authorities claimed that he targeted Julie and Laura out of a hatred for women and for the homosexual community. However, 2 years later, the charges against Rice were dropped once it was determined that DNA and hair samples from the crime scene did not match to Rice. Additional testing revealed that the hair found was visually similar under a microscope to that of known serial killer Richard M. Evenitz. In June of 2002, Evenitz was about to be arrested for an unrelated crime, but he ended up killing himself as police closed in. Forensic evidence eventually linked Evenitz to the unsolved murders of 3 teenage girls, all killed in the mid-90s. As these crimes also occurred in Virginia around the same time that Julie and Laura were murdered, Evenitz was considered a suspect, but nothing else connected him to the crime directly. For the next 25 years, the case remained cold, but in 2021, a new FBI Richmond investigative team was assigned to review the case. The task force re-examined previous leads and interviews as well as evidence recovered from the site of the killings. The team sent the evidence collected from the crime scene and had it retested by an accredited private lab. The private lab collected DNA from, quote, several items of evidence, and with the help of Virginia State Police, the DNA profile was sent to the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, also known as CODIS. Finally, in June of 2024, the DNA was positively matched to Walter Leo Jackson Sr., a convicted serial rapist from Cleveland. Jackson, who had painted homes for a living, died in an Ohio prison in March of 2018. He had an extensive criminal history, including convictions for kidnapping and assault. At the time of the killings, Jackson, who officials said was an avid hiker, was believed to have been driving a 1984 chestnut brown AMC Eagle 30, and later drove a Ford van. At a press conference, the FBI revealed details about the vehicles associated with the suspect, Jackson, and released photos of him, seeking the public's assistance in determining whether he may have had additional victims. Despite ongoing investigations into possible further crimes, after 28 years, the murders of Julie Williams and Laura Winans are now officially considered a closed case. The tragic killings remain a haunting reminder of the dangers lurking even in the most serene of locations. And though justice has been served for these 2 women, questions surrounding other potential victims linger. Moving on to the next case. Patricia Viola. Patricia Viola, a 42-year-old housewife and mother of 2, lived in Bogota, New Jersey, with her husband, James, and their children, Christine and Michael. Patricia was renowned for her dedication to making special occasions memorable for her family. She put a lot of effort into creating elaborate homemade cakes and personalized gifts, and even volunteered as a librarian at her son's school. Her caring nature and attention to detail made her well loved by friends and family. However, Patricia's life took a dark turn when she disappeared under strange circumstances. In the days leading up to her disappearance, there were unsettling events, including an ominous request from a friend, an unusual confrontation, and a burglar alarm being tripped at her home. Patricia's remains were later found 45 miles away, leaving many questions about how she ended up on that beach and what truly happened to her. Patricia was known for her kindness, always going the extra mile to make holidays special with homemade cakes and personalized gifts. She dedicated her time as a volunteer librarian at her son's school and was deeply loved by friends and family for her generosity and nurturing nature. In the months leading up to her disappearance, Patricia had been under significant stress, having spent countless hours caring for her sick mother-in-law and assisting her sister-in-law, Donna, who was staying with the family after going through a difficult breakup. Despite her selflessness and devotion to others, this period of added responsibility weighed heavily on her. She evidently held herself to high expectations, said one family member, and the people in her life had come to expect her for going above and beyond. Patricia had epilepsy, and normally carried her medication with her at all times. Roughly 3 months prior to her disappearance in November of 2000, Patricia experienced a grand mal seizure. Following this, her driver's license was suspended for 90 days at the recommendation of her doctor. This was hugely limiting to Patricia's independence and mobility, and reportedly impacted her morale heavily. She could no longer easily do the things she loved, such as going to the mall alone to buy presents for her family, which she expressed sadness about during the Christmas season. Additionally, it made family obligations even more difficult. For instance, Patricia having to travel across town to check on her mother-in-law in the hospital became all the more stressful and time-consuming. In the weeks prior to her disappearance, the stress in Patricia's life continued to mount. Several events were weighing on her heavily and gave loved ones reason to worry. On February 6th, 1 week prior to Patricia going missing, Patricia received upsetting news. Her doctor was recommending another 90-day suspension of her driving privileges, extending her time without a license until at least late spring. Patricia was reportedly incredibly depressed by this news. Tensions between Patricia and Donna, her sister-in-law, were continuing to build following issues that arose from Donna staying at the Viola household. Donna was a smoker and Patricia was not. She did not approve of Donna smoking in the house and had so far been unable to convince her to stop. The typically level-headed and non-confrontational Patricia had been managing the effects of Donna's indoor smoking instead by cleaning, vacuuming and airing out Donna's room on a daily basis. The day before she went missing, Patricia discovered that Donna had burned a hole in the guest bedspread, a move that could have started a fire and put the entire family in danger. Although Patricia was upset, she and her husband decided to wait to address it with Donna until the following day. On February 12, 2001, the night before Patricia's disappearance, she and Jim attended a party in Brooklyn, New York at the home of Patricia's best friend and close confidant, Twinette Fazio Markowitz. When Patricia arrived at the party, Twinette noticed that she was immaculately dressed with her hair and makeup done beautifully and fittingly for the occasion. But even then, Twinette recalls she knew something was amiss. As the party progressed, Patricia pulled Twinette into an empty bedroom in order to speak with her privately. Once alone with her friend, Patricia burst into tears. Through heaving sobs, she managed to tell Twinette that she had something which she needed to discuss. But when Twinette pressed her for more details repeatedly, Patricia insisted that the full story was far too complicated to explain that moment. While she did not reveal what was ailing her, Patricia did, however, ask two things of her best friend. First, she begged Twinette to cancel her upcoming personal vacation, to which her best friend confusingly agreed. Patricia tearfully claimed that she would soon finally tell Twinette everything if the two of them could just go away together for a few days. She then chillingly asked Toyn for another favor. She asked that Toyn, quote, take care of her kids no matter what. On the morning of Tuesday, February 13, 2001, Jim left for work at his usual departure time of 6:30 a.m. At 8:15, Christine and Michael left for school. Shortly after, Twinette called Patricia to discuss her emotional breakdown the night before. Shockingly, Twinette recalls Patricia brushing off the situation completely, instead redirecting the telephone conversation to the topic of a gag gift that she intended to buy Jim for Valentine's Day, which was to occur the next day. The present she discussed buying Jim was that of a singing monkey in a cage, similar to one that Twinette had bought for her own husband. Shockingly to Twinette, Patricia gave no explanation for the events of the previous night nor space in the conversation to even broach the subject. Twinette remembers thinking to herself that Patricia sounded tired and seemed in a hurry to get off of the phone. Immediately after hanging up with Twinette, Patricia reportedly stormed downstairs to confront her sister-in-law Donna. Her anger stemmed from the danger that was brought about by the cigarette-burned bedspread. This confrontation, her husband, Jim, would later remark was extraordinarily out of character for Patricia. Jim recalls being told by his sister that Patricia acted irate and screamed, quote, like a raving maniac. All of this occurred in the mere 20 minutes after the children left for school. At 8:38 a.m., Patricia left her home and walked to Bixby Elementary School, where she volunteered as a librarian. Bixby Elementary was located on the corner of Fisher and Chestnut Avenues, less than 2 blocks away from the family home and an easy walk. Patricia spent roughly 2 hours at the library that day, spending her time shelving books and assisting at the checkout counter. At some point after Patricia left for the library, a local security company got a report of a security alarm going off at the Viola home. At first, they tried to contact Patricia, but they were unable to reach her. Those close to her say that while Patricia did have a cell phone, she rarely turned it on. The security company then tried to contact Jim, who was unreachable due to his being at work. The alarm company then called Patricia's mother, who answered the call and promptly called the Viola home to check on her daughter. Finding no answer to her phone call, Patricia's mom left officers from the station performed a visual check of the exterior of the home by walking the perimeter of the property and checking in the windows. Ultimately, they determined that nothing looked abnormal and deduced that the front door probably did not close fully when Patricia left. Such a situation would have triggered the alarm and had happened in the past, so the scenario was not out of the ordinary for the quiet town. Between 11:35 and 11:40 a.m., Patricia left her volunteer position at the elementary school and began her walk home. On her short trip, Patricia was witnessed by a crossing guard on Palisade Avenue. She also waved at a passing mailman. This would be the last confirmed sighting of her. Patricia arrived home to the answering machine blinking. Reports say that she listened to the message from her mother and returned the call. During this telephone conversation, Patricia assured her mother that everything was fine at the home and that she was aware of the alarm situation. Her mom recalls that the rest of the conversation was normal. This would be the last time that anyone on record ever spoke with Patricia Viola. At some point between 1:11 p.m. and 4 p.m., Patricia, by unknown means and for unknown reasons, left her home again. She had no mode of transportation and had not told anybody, not her husband, her mother, her best friend Twinette, nor anyone at the library about any plans to go anywhere that day. According to a reading of the alarm control panel, Patricia performed a reset of the home's security system at 1:11 p.m. Likely, this was her rearming the alarm system on her way out of the home. As the alarm had been triggered that morning, a reset of the system was required in order to rearm the security capabilities. As such, many assume that the mother of two left the home sometime between the reset at 1:11 p.m. and when Jim returned home from work, which was at 4:30 p.m. Nobody knows if Patricia left voluntarily or if she was forced to leave. At 4:30 p.m., Jim returned home to find that the alarm had been reset and was beeping at his entry. Upon entering the house, he noticed that Patricia was nowhere to be found. As the family only set the alarm system before going to bed or prior to leaving the house, Jim deduced that his wife was not home, but he did not become concerned until he saw that was left behind. Although Patricia's coat was missing, her purse, keys, cell phone, ID, and epilepsy medicine was still at home. The fact that Patricia failed to bring her anti-seizure medication was the most concerning to those closest to her, as she was meticulous about taking and carrying her medication. She required the medicine twice a day in order to stave off future seizures, which could further restrict her driving capabilities. Because of the architecture of the back door, the Viola family had to use a key to lock it. This key was always left inserted into the deadbolt. Strangely, when he got home, Jim found the key lying on the kitchen table, which was out of place. Confident that Patricia could have only departed the home on foot, Jim called friends and family while also consulting bus schedules to try and locate his wife. With no luck and having exhausted his options, at 11:58, Jim, now frantic, called police to report Patricia missing. Captain James Sepp of the Bogota Police Department took his complaint, and over the following days, local police conducted door-to-door searches to speak with neighbors, consulted taxi logs from all the car services in town, and stopped buses to be searched along the main routes. While the community response was robust, it was all to no avail. The Bogota Police Department also consulted with Port Authority police to inspect flight manifests from nearby airports. They also checked that no jumping attempts had been reported at the George Washington Bridge that day. The Viola family, alongside concerned neighbors and friends, papered the area with missing person flyers. 3 days after Patricia's disappearance, investigators brought in police dogs to search the ground while also conducting aerial searches. Law enforcement kept in touch with area hospitals as well. However, no Jane Does nor Patricia Violas were ever checked in. Nothing, no evidence, no trace of Patricia's whereabouts or even her mere presence turned up in the ensuing days. Each day that progressed with no news caused Patricia's family to fear that the worst had happened. 2 weeks after Patricia went missing, frustrated at the stagnation of the investigation, Jim and Toinette intensified their own search for Patricia. Toinette spoke to every drugstore and corner shop within walking distance from the Viola home. The pair noted that the singing monkey gift that Patricia had mentioned wanting to buy for Jim was in stock at a Rite Aid pharmacy nearby. Toinette showed the store clerk a picture of Patricia, and the worker did recall seeing Patricia in the store on the day she went missing. However, he said that he had no idea where or in which direction she went after leaving the store. Jim focused his search on local hospitals, as well as his theory at the time was that Patricia may have had another epileptic seizure, of which amnesia could be a possible side effect. But just as police had canvassed and come up with no leads, so too did Patricia's husband. Jim himself was investigated as the husband or romantic partner is statistically the most likely to have committed violence against the missing woman, but he was ruled out by investigators. He first drew suspicion when it was discovered that he had taken the afternoon off of work the day that his wife went missing, but his alibi of being out shopping for Valentine's Day gifts for his wife checked out. He also passed a polygraph exam and has been fully cooperative with the investigation. Jim has continued to keep Patricia's case alive through legislation, media coverage, online discussions, and posters. Some close to the case wondered if there was more to the conflict that Patricia had had with Donna, Patricia's sister-in-law. It was agreed by all that her confrontation and subsequent harsh words were extremely out of character. Some suggested that possibly Donna had tripped the alarm in order to draw Patricia home early, and some also wonder where she was the day Patricia went missing and whether or not she was in the house when Patricia returned home from the library. Those close to the case say that it is odd Donna has not participated in any of the interviews or TV specials related to the case. 1 month after Patricia's disappearance, investigators received a tip from someone who said he saw the woman in East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania while stopped at a red light. The Viola family did have a timeshare in nearby Shawnee, Pennsylvania, but although there was hope that the sighting would prove legitimate, nothing ever came of this, and it is unclear if the witness ever saw Patricia or merely a woman who looked similar to her. 1 year after Patricia mysteriously vanished, a man called the Bogota Police Department and claimed that Patricia was in fact dead. He also claimed responsibility for the killing. He said to investigators on the phone, quote, "I killed the old girl." But soon, the police were able to rule this out as a false confession, as the caller had also claimed to have Patricia's driver's license with him, which she had most certainly left behind when she vanished. Further investigation by police into this matter eventually proved this man's confession a hoax. Then, on the stifling hot summer day of July 27, 2002, a left foot, shoe and sock were discovered washed up on the 123rd Street stretch of Rockaway Beach in Queens, New York. This was roughly 45 miles away from the Viola's home in New Jersey. Rockaway Beach runs roughly 5.5 miles across the Atlantic Ocean with projected currents, making it so Patricia's origination was undetermined. Police did conduct additional searches on foot and by helicopter, but no additional remains nor clues ever surfaced. DNA samples were along with the remains in 2005 to be tested. In 2009, New York sent the DNA sample to the Combined DNA Index System lab in West Texas. In 2008, New Jersey finally adopted Patricia's law after tireless efforts by her husband, Jim, to get laws concerning missing people passed. This law was to supplement Title 52 of the revised statutes, which develops the best practices protocol for all law enforcement agencies to follow when addressing reports of missing persons or unidentified deceased human remains. The new law forced officers to begin to investigate missing persons reports immediately, and required that DNA be secured from victims' family and cross-checked in national databases for cases open longer than 30 days. By 2010, requirements to cross-check DNA under Patricia's law were securely in place. On September 12, 2012, poignantly, the first missing person whose remains were officially identified through the adoption of this new law was Patricia Viola herself. Her remains were identified by the New York City Medical Examiner's Office. No other artifacts have ever been recovered in connection to her case. With only 1 foot to go on, no cause of death could ever be determined. Investigators continued to suspect foul play and asked the public for any help or information. On February 25, 2013, Patricia Viola was buried in Hackensack Cemetery in New Jersey. If Patricia had or was in the middle of another epileptic seizure, it could have explained her erratic behavior in the days leading up to her disappearance. Due to experiencing such an event, it was possible that she had left her home for unknown reasons and then tried to seek medical attention for an attack that happened en route, or perhaps her exit was initially for medical services themselves. As with neurological side effects, she may have not been in a state to contact anybody or indicate her whereabouts. Some wonder if perhaps Patricia had a seizure on her way back home from Rite Aid and then disappeared somewhere along her route. In a morbid and odd connection to another murder case, just 5 years before Patricia went missing in October of 1997, a triple homicide occurred in the house directly across the street from the Viola home. The incident had been a robbery homicide which targeted a diamond dealer in the house. Besides the diamond dealer, 2 others were murdered as well. 4 men were eventually arrested for the crime and their trial was underway at the time of Patricia's disappearance. According to available reports and information, Patricia was not a witness to that crime and had no official ties to it. Still, some theorize that she was potentially kidnapped or killed either because someone believed her to be a witness or because of a case of mistaken identity targeting an actual witness in the area. Others wonder about the curious incident with the alarm system going off. It's been theorized that someone may have been waiting in the Viola house for Patricia to return. One theory suggests that Patricia's return home may have been interrupted by a burglar or another intruder, who then attacked or forced her to leave against her will. This possibility adds to the mystery of her disappearance, and despite ongoing efforts, her case remains open and unsolved. Authorities have classified her case as a homicide investigation, and a $10,000 reward has been offered for anyone who comes forward with valuable information that could help solve her death. Moving on to the next case. Linda Hazzard. In the 19th century, alternative medicines were often marketed as miracle cures for a wide range of ailments, despite their dangerous properties. Strychnine was sold as an athletic performance booster, heroin was given to children as a remedy, and cocaine was recommended for treating alcoholism, with Sigmund Freud even endorsing its medical uses. These substances were widely available in various forms, including powders, wines, and soft drinks. Thankfully, by 2023, medicine has advanced significantly, prioritizing safety and scientific evidence in its treatments. But back then, science was not so advanced, and the general public didn't have access to information the way we do today. As a result, they were often misinformed and relied on those who sold themselves as doctors. One of the most nightmarish figures of the late 19th, early 20th century who masqueraded as a health professional was a woman by the name of Linda Hazzard. Hazzard was born Linda Lauren Burfield on December 18, 1867 in the small city of Carver nestled along the banks of the Minnesota River. While today, the city has almost 6,000 residents, back in the 1860s, it had a population of just over 700 people. Hazzard was the oldest child born to Susanna Neal and Montgomery Burfield and had 6 siblings. At the age of 18, she married and went on to give birth to 2 children. But in 1898, she left her family behind to return to Minnesota where she pursued a medical career. Hazzard never attended university and never acquired a medical degree, but she managed to nab a medical license for herself in the state of Washington by exploiting a loophole that saw alternative medicine practitioners being exempt from more modern regulations. Hazzard was a staunch believer in therapeutic fasting. According to her book, The Science of Fasting, she spent a great deal of time studying under Edward Hooker Dewey, a doctor who advocated for fasting and invented the no breakfast plan, wherein he argued that people should only consume 2 meals a day and they should give up breakfast, claiming that disease and physiological problems were the result of excessive eating. He believed fasting could even cure mental health issues. However, many doctors disagreed with Dewey's takes. In 1910, the British Medical Journal described him as not an accurate or careful writer, as he had written many medical errors throughout his books. They also labeled his claims that fasting was a cure-all for disease as a foolish delusion. Other doctors noted that fasting should only be carried out under medical supervision. Hazard, however, was uninterested in the criticism levied against her mentor. She developed her own fasting method that she claimed was a remedy for all sorts of illnesses. Using her technique, one could supposedly rid themselves of toxins which caused imbalances in the body. In 198, aged 41, she published her first book, Fasting for the Cure of Disease. And 9 years later, she released her second, Diet in Disease and Systematic Cleansing. In 1927, her first publication was re-released using the title, Scientific Fasting, The Ancient and Modern Key to Health. In her books, Hazard wrote that the cause of all illness lay in food, something she picked up from her mentor. She stated, appetite is craving. Hunger is desire. Craving is never satisfied, but desire is relieved when want is supplied. She believed that the path to good health and long life was to let the digestive system rest by fasting. Despite both Hazard and Dewey receiving disapproval from the wider medical community, the public found the concept of fasting interesting, and it was seen as trendy to partake in it. The success of Hazard's written work helped her to establish a specialized hospital called Wilderness Heights in Olalla, Washington. Inside the walls of Wilderness Heights, inpatients fasted for days, weeks, and even months. Their diets consisted of tiny portions of various fruit and vegetable juices and broths. What they were eating was unsurprisingly nowhere near enough to sustain them, especially since the broth often consisted of a tomato placed in hot water and then removed before the broth was served to patients. While some patients survived their trip to the hospital and would then publicly endorse Hazard's methods, many died while in her care. In defense of her techniques, Hazard would tell people that those who died had succumbed to a separate undiagnosed illness such as cancer or cirrhosis of the liver. Local residents began referring to the hospital as Starvation Heights because the hungry, frail, and skeletal patients could be seen wandering around looking for food and help. Furthermore, Hazard was known to steal the belongings of her patients after death and often had them sign over their estates before their demise. It is believed that Hazard killed her first patient in 1902, long before she published her first book. The patients' post-mortem showed they had died from starvation, and the local coroner attempted to have Hazard prosecuted. Bizarrely, however, because she wasn't licensed to practice medicine, she was not able to be held accountable for her actions. She was reportedly vague when asked about the patient's missing jewelry. Just as her divorce was finalized, Hazard met Samuel Christman Hazard. A former military man, Samuel had ruined his career in the army by misappropriating army funds. He was often described as a drunk, a leck, and a swindler, making him a good match for Hazard and her callous ways. After they married, Samuel spent 2 years in prison as he'd failed to divorce at least one of his wives. One of Hazard's earliest patients was a woman named Gertrude Young. Gertrude had been looking for a cure after she'd been left partially paralyzed following a stroke. She had been left without the function of one leg and one arm. Hazard convinced Gertrude that she had a remedy, promising that a 40-day fast would bring back her mobility. Gertrude, who was clearly desperate and willing to try anything to regain what she'd lost post-paralysis, agreed to the fast and began treatment. A friend accompanied the woman to the hospital and stayed with her, as she was instructed each day by Hazard or her nurses. Gertrude was not allowed to eat food but could consume small amounts of liquid, often consisting of tomato broth or strained orange juice. 30 days into Gertrude's 40-day fast, she was found shaking, sweating, and throwing up what is described as a thick, dark substance. Although it was winter and the temperature was biting outside, Hazard had the windows to the room opened. She insisted her patient needed fresh air, but it seems to make Gertrude all the more ill. Gertrude's companion called her usual doctor, the one who had helped her manage since becoming paralyzed. The doctor explained that Hazard's alleged cure was never going to work and that Gertrude needed to stop fasting immediately. Despite this, however, Gertrude refused to listen to her doctor. Hazard had been so convincing that Gertrude was sure she would be cured if she could just make it another 10 days. But Gertrude Young did not make it. She died on day 39. Hazard, however, was not charged with murder or even manslaughter, as Gertrude was seen to have made the decision to continue with the fast herself since she had opted not to listen to her doctor's advice. Hazard was not intimidated either. She continued to treat patients at her establishment in the exact same way, completely unfazed by her brush with the law. On March 28, 1910, Earl Edward Erdman, a civil engineer based in Seattle, died from starvation in the Seattle General Hospital. Notably, he'd kept a diary of his time at Wilderness Heights, and he'd written down the details of Hazard's methods during the weeks he was in her care. Beginning February 1st and spanning the entire month, Earl ate less than one meal a day. On his very first day at the hospital, his dinner and supper each consisted of mashed soup dinner. 5 days later, he had the same, this time with 1 orange for breakfast. 2 weeks into his treatment, he had only 2 oranges for breakfast and no dinner or any supper. Over the next few days, he was given 1 cup of soup per day. Around February 16th, Earl noted, "Slept better last night, head quite dizzy, eyes yellow streaked and red." 5 days later, he detailed that he was suffering from backache just below his ribs and slept poorly that night. By the end of February, he'd mentioned having a kind of frontal headache, pain in his right side below his ribs and pain below his ribs in his back. His diet, generally consisting of tomato broth, oranges and strained orange juice, never changed up to his hospitalization on March 28th. 2 other patients of Hazard were wealthy heiresses with property in the US, Canada, and Australia. Claire and Dorothy Williamson had been orphaned as children and both dealt with hypochondria, often spending large sums of cash for medical care they didn't really need. At the time of the sisters' arrival, though, Wilderness Heights was not finished being built. As a result, they were treated in an apartment in Seattle, Washington. Their treatment was somehow even more grotesque than that of Gertrude Young. The 2 women were starved, beaten, and subjected to needless hours-long enemas. Nurses would later state that as a part of the inpatient's treatment plans, they were to undergo massages, but that these massages often sounded more like violent physical assaults. The 2 sisters eventually became so frail that they struggled to walk. Neighbors in the apartment complex recalled hearing them crying and screaming. Hazard knew that they were becoming aware that something odd was going on in the apartments, so she ended up placing them on gurneys and having them moved from the building to her unfinished hospital in Olalla. The 2 women had been starved so greatly, they had become delirious. Hazard, though, as cold and callous as she was, decided that this was the perfect opportunity to make herself an extraordinarily wealthy woman. Writing new wills for the sisters, Hazard appointed herself as both their legal guardian and the beneficiary of their estate valued at over $500,000. Furthermore, she stole the pair's jewelry and valuables estimated to be worth around $6,000, wore their clothes, and stopped the 2 from being able to see and speak with each other. It is unclear how, but word emerged that the 2 were in trouble when Dorothy managed to contact the sisters' previous governess. The governess, though, was based in England, although some sources state it was Australia. And by the time she arrived in Washington, Claire had already passed away. She had weighed less than £8.50 at the time of her death. Hazard attempted to shift the blame, claiming that drugs administered to Claire as a child had caused her internal organs to shrink and led to corrosive of the liver. The governess was aghast when she saw the body and noted that Dorothy looked close to death herself. She eventually had the remaining sister removed from Hazard's care after some struggle. She would have to contact one of the sisters' uncles, a wealthy man named John Herbert who lived in Portland, Oregon, to initiate the move. After haggling with Hazard, John paid almost $1,000 for the release of his niece. After securing Dorothy's safety, he turned to Lucien Agassiz, the British vice consul in Tacoma, and together, they began to look into Hazard. They discovered she was connected with the deaths of numerous wealthy individuals, and many of these high society members had signed their riches over before their deaths. One such victim was an Englishman named John Ivan Flux. He'd come to the US to buy a ranch, and yet when he died in Hazard's care, he had only $70 to his name. Furthermore, a New Zealander named Eugene Wackelin reportedly shot himself while he was an inpatient at Wilderness Heights. Before his death, Hazard had managed to become the administrator of his estate and drained all his money. On August 15, 1911, Kitsap County law enforcement arrested Hazard for the first-degree murder of Claire Williamson. Her trial began in January of 1912, and facility employees including nurses testified against Hazard, noting that the sisters endured scorching baths and frequently suffered through enormous pain at the hands of Hazard, who had been dubbed the starvation doctor. During the trial, the public was also made aware of Hazard's tendency to financially drain all of her victims. The prosecution called it financial starvation. The doctor showed no remorse or regrets, and took no responsibility for Claire's demise. In her first book, Hazard wrote, "Death in the fast never results from deprivation of food, but is the inevitable consequence of vitality sapped to the last degree by organic imperfection." And she stuck by that even while on trial for murder. She claimed she was being attacked because she was a successful woman and because she practiced unconventional medicine that traditional doctors disapproved of. Still, the jury did not believe much of what Hazard had to say at her trial. After briefly deliberating, she was found guilty of manslaughter and was ultimately sentenced to between 2 to 20 years in prison. Additionally, her medical license was revoked. She spent her brief stint behind bars at Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, serving just 2 years before being released on parole on December 26, 1915. The following year, Governor Ernest Lister incredibly gave Hazard a full pardon, though her medical license was never reinstated. Accompanied by her husband, Hazard left the US and moved to New Zealand, where she continued to work as a dietitian and alternative medical practitioner. However, in 1917, a local newspaper revealed that Hazard's medical license only allowed her to practice in Washington. As she used the title doctor, she was subsequently charged in Auckland for practicing medicine while not registered to do so. She was fined around 600 New Zealand dollars for this crime. 3 years later, though, Hazard returned to Alala. She opened a new facility here, but this time, she called it a School of Health, as her medical license had been revoked. Despite its name change, the establishment essentially operated in the same way that Wilderness Heights did, and Hazard continued to oversee fasts until the facility burned to the ground in 1935. It was never rebuilt. Although Linda Hazard was only ever charged with one case of manslaughter, she is often seen today as a serial killer due to the numerous patients who perished while under her care, adhering to the supposed treatment plan she had laid out for them. Between 1908 and 1912, Hazard is believed to have caused the deaths of at least 16 people, including Earl Eardman and Claire Williamson, following her controversial advice. Rader, reportedly the original owner of the land where Hazard's Wilderness Heights facility was established, may have been linked to the deaths, though it's possible Hazard was responsible for many more. Ironically, Hazard herself died at the age of 70 on June 24, 1938, after attempting to cure an illness through fasting. Tragically, she passed away from starvation, just as many of her patients had. Moving on to the next case. Jack Donald Lewis. Jack Donald Lewis, known to many as Don, was a beloved figure and an influential businessman in the exotic animal industry. His passion for wildlife, particularly big cats, and his entrepreneurial spirit helped him build a thriving business, Wildlife on Easy Street, in Tampa, Florida. He was well regarded for his deep connection to wildlife and his expertise in the care and preservation of exotic animals, particularly tigers and other big cats. His savvy in real estate also played a major role in his success, adding another layer to his already impressive legacy. But on August 18, 1997, Don's life was abruptly interrupted when he mysteriously disappeared. His sudden vanishing sparked a widespread investigation, but over the years, the case remained unsolved, leaving his friends, family, and fans searching for answers. Despite the substantial evidence that came to light, including suspicions surrounding his personal life and business dealings, nothing definitive was found to explain his disappearance. Don's case continues to be a source of intrigue and speculation, particularly with the emergence of new theories and claims in recent years. His disappearance remains one of the most perplexing unsolved mysteries in Florida's history, and the questions surrounding what happened to him are as unanswered as they were in 1997. As investigators continue to sift through evidence and revisit old leads, the mystery of Don Lewis's fate remains one of the most baffling and unresolved in the world of true crime. In Don's early years as a child, his father abandoned the family and left Don's mother to raise him and his two siblings. While Don's mother did her best to support her children through freelance gigs as a for-hire seamstress and bread baker, her income wasn't quite enough. Thus, to help aid his mother and take care of the family, Don started working at a young age, forming the foundation to his business ethics. As an adolescent, Don helped out a local mechanic and worked as a farmhand for nearby ranch owners, and successfully graduated from Pasco High School in 1955. When he was only 17 years old, Don married his first wife, known today as Gladys Lewis Cross. Together, the couple had 3 daughters and adopted a son, just as Don continued to expand his economic prowess. He worked countless odd jobs around Florida and eventually settled in the used car business and automotive trade. Slowly but surely, Don built his brand scrapping old machines, selling parts and metal resources while simultaneously investing in real estate opportunities. Don would buy parcels of land to develop and resell, sometimes keeping tracts of land for himself for future business ideas. Before long, Don was a self-made millionaire and the prime example of the American dream in action, starting from nothing and forging his own path to success. Friends and associates of Don would say that no one could tell his success just by looking at him. He always dressed like a normal laborer and kept his public life simple. However, he would keep a $500 bill in his pocket at all times, a symbol of his ability to turn anything he touched into profits, a true green thumb. However, Don's personal life wasn't quite so perfect. It was a well-known fact after his first marriage that he was a womanizer, and often found mistresses or second girlfriends to take care of, despite having the family back home. One such instance occurred in 1981 when Don met a young woman named Carol Murdoch at the time on Nebraska Avenue in Tampa, Florida. Carol was walking alone at night and crying after struggling with her then-husband, Michael Murdoch. Don asked Carol if she needed a ride, and initially, Carol rejected him. However, Don circled around in his truck anyway, even offering the gun in his passenger seat to Carol to use as protection while he drove, explaining that he needed someone to talk to as well. Carol finally agreed, and after conversing with one another for a while, Carol stayed with him that night, and the two fell in love. Of course, this sent shock waves through Don's family, and tensions arose between him and his then-wife, Gladys. Nevertheless, Don continued his relationship with Carol, who joined his real estate business and helped increase his profits through major land sales. Not long afterwards, Don and Carol's relationship became too serious to ignore, and they divorced their respective spouses and married in 1991. With the excess money from Don's empire, he bought his new cat-loving wife, a bobcat called Windsong, at an auction. The couple then began buying big cats from a breeder in Minnesota who was planning on slaughtering them for the fur trade. As was perhaps in his nature, Don viewed this as another chance to create a business, and in 1992, founded Wildlife on Easy Street with Carol and what would later become Big Cat Rescue. Carol, however, thought the initiative should be a charity and not just for profit, but Don disagreed, and slowly, tensions arose between the two. Over the next few years, Don continued developing Wildlife on Easy Streets and started buying more animals. In 1995, he bought his first tiger from Dennis Hall, and around the same time was beginning the process of taking his beloved emporium and moving it to Costa Rica, where he'd been buying vast tracts of lands and making connections and associates on the tropical island. At the same time, others began thinking that Don was using Costa Rica as a means to attract women unbeknownst to Carol and escaping away with Costa Rican mistresses. This continued to damage the pair's relationship, and soon it fell beyond repair. In early 1997, Don Lewis began preparing for divorce, gathering his assets together and planning for a future away from Carol. Carol claims that at this same time, he began showing early signs of dementia. His short-term memory declining while digging through dumpsters and collecting junk for seemingly no good reason. Don's lawyer and business associates later said this wasn't proven, and they had never witnessed Don in a worsening state of mind. Regardless, Don's frantic behavior did include a growing fear of Carol. And in June of 1997, he filed a restraining order against her after she verbally threatened to kill him. According to Don, Carol was in possession of multiple guns, but the courts never granted him protection due to her freedoms of speech under the First Amendment, and they felt she posed no true physical harm to him. Don was a worried man, and soon his paranoia was proven correct when at the end of that same summer, the threats, confusion, and anxiety gave way to a tragic mystery. Let us now review the timeline of events that led to the disappearance of Don Lewis. In June of 1997, Don Lewis begins exhibiting signs of paranoia, anxiety, and fear, centering around his then-wife Carol Lewis, now known as Carol Baskin. He gives his executive assistant at the time, and the Queen, an envelope containing a restraining order against Carol to be submitted to the local courts. This document contains unnerving quotes by Don, such as, quote, "This is the second time Carol has gotten angry enough to threaten to kill me. Carol got in a big fuss. She ordered me out the house or she would kill me. She has a .45 revolver, and she took my .357 and hid it." Later that June, the Florida courts denied protection from the restraining order, saying Carol is no immediate threat, and that the First Amendment granting free speech allows her to say such things without consequence. Throughout the summer, Don's erratic behavior continues. He tells his former wife, Gladys, and a couple of their children to stay away from Carol, that he's done with her and planning to divorce her. He speaks his final words to them saying Carol is one of the worst people and quite dangerous. Not long after this encounter, Don repeats the same information about his probable divorce to business associate Wendell Williams. Don signals to Wendell that he is putting most of his possessions in a protective state that would allow him to keep most of what he owned and away from a settlement. Sometime in July of 1997, Don gets together with another friend, Mike McCarthy, tells him that he feels his life is in danger. As July turns to August, Don informs his lawyer, Joseph Fritz, he's in search of another small passenger plane to add to his collection of planes. He finds one he likes, but the aircraft needs work to be able to fly for longer durations of time. At some point during the first 2.5 weeks of that same August, Don has a conversation with his longtime handyman of 15 years, Kenny Farr, while they build a new complex cage for the big cats. Don remarks that he has vague plans of some sorts, plans he never fully explains to Kenny, but is intent on carrying out. At the end of their talk, Don says, quote, "If I can pull this off, it will have been the slickest thing I've ever done in my life." Before Kenny can ask for clarity, Don leaves to attend a phone call and never finishes his thoughts. It would be the last thing Don ever says to Kenny. On Friday, August 15th, Don's assistant and McQueen calls Don regarding paperwork for cars he's preparing to take down to Costa Rica. Despite multiple attempts to reach him by phone, and isn't able to make contact, and continues calling throughout that weekend, but she still has no luck. In the evening of August 17th, Don prepares to drive down to Miami and then travel on to Costa Rica. He tells Carol he needs a truck made available for travel by his handyman Kenny, but it's unknown if he ever secures one. That night and into the early morning hours of August 18th, Carol makes her own plans to do chores and run errands for the Big Cat Resort. At around 3 a.m., Carol goes to a shop called Albertsons to buy milk byproduct for the cats. Her car breaks down, but she's saved by her brother, a local sheriff's deputy, who gives her a ride back to her home. Just a few hours later, a little prior to 6 a.m. on August 18, 1997, Don Lewis leaves his house to make an early delivery of real estate paperwork to his lawyer's main office, and then to travel to Miami, and ultimately, Costa Rica. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Jack Donald Lewis. Nearly 36 hours pass by, and no one hears from Don, and calls Carol with real concern and suggests they get the authorities involved. Carol agrees, and at about 1:30 p.m. on August 19th, she telephones law enforcement to officially report Don Lewis as a missing person. In the first 24 hours after the missing persons report is filed, police and a few volunteers comb Don's entire 40-acre property in Tampa, Florida, including the wildlife on Easy Street resorts. Despite a thorough search, including aerial support, detectives find no clues or anything to suggest they should continue digging at Don's residence. On August 20th, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office discovers Don's personal van, a 1989 Dodge Ram, parked and abandoned at the Pilots Country Airport in Spring Hill, Florida, about 40 miles away from Don's last appearance at his animal sanctuary. Besides the keys to the van and a briefcase full of insignificant documents, nothing of note is found inside the vehicle, and the trail of clues is frozen once again. Over the next 4 to 5 days, detectives traveled down to Costa Rica to progress the manhunt. While investigating every nook and cranny possible, law enforcement discovers Don had been engaged in extramarital affairs whilst in Costa Rica. They interview possible connections to Don and those who knew of the businessman, but still find zero leads. The only thing remarkable that investigators learn is that 2 of Don's exotic animals, a pair of ocelots, were shipped out just before Don disappeared, but where they went is still unknown. Initial reports once Don's disappearance reaches national headlines state that they believe Don probably walked away on his own, but as time goes on, both the media and investigators start thinking something more sinister is at play. A few days after the 1-year anniversary of Don's vanishing on August 23, 1998, Carol refuses to take a polygraph test or allow investigators to carry out an intensive search of her wildlife sanctuary or the meat freezers, citing legal advice from her attorney. Later in 1998, Don Lewis' ex-wife, Gladys, and their daughters publicly accuse Carol of being responsible for Don's fate and discarding the body via the exotic animals they own. This is heavily refuted by Carol. In August 2002, on the 5-year and 1-day mark since he first disappeared, Don is declared legally dead by Carol, and his wills are put solely in her possession due to the specific verbiage used in his documents. 9 years later in 2011, Carol is asked one more time by investigators to undergo a polygraph test. Once again, she refuses this request. Over the next decade, countless conspiracies and folk tales are created by curious bystanders of the case and by those with ties to Don, his ex-wife Carol, and their big cat business. However, John Mariscano, the lead homicide detective and spokesman of the investigation for Hillsborough County Sheriff, has shot down any and all gossip in April of 2020, stating that authorities have no prime suspects, no leads, and still no updates regarding the disappearance of Don Lewis, a case just as cold as it had been in that early August morning 23 years before. Not a lot of physical evidence remains in the Don Lewis disappearance, and without a final phone call recording left over or CCTV footage capturing Don's penultimate movements, there's not much to run with. However, one discovery does provide us at least a hint of what happened to Don before he vanished, even if it does bring more confusion than clarity. The day after Don was reported missing, investigators discovered his 1989 Dodge Ram van discarded at the Pilot Country Airport in Spring Hill, Florida. The airport was about 40 miles, give or take, from Don's personal residence, and initially thought to be where he flew out of that August morning. The troubling thing was that almost nothing was left behind in the van, and the things that were did not preclude a self-made decision to escape. Inside were the van's keys and Don's briefcase full of random papers. Unfortunately, the police did not impound the vehicle right away, leaving it abandoned in that parking lot, allowing for possible tampering and for critical physical evidence to be removed if there was something hidden on the atomic level. When the police did analyze the forensics, they found nothing but normal traces of Don and a second pair of fingerprints belonging to an auto mechanic, Dale Lively. When law enforcement interviewed Dale, he gave proof of a perfectly innocent explanation, stating a few days before the disappearance, Don had swung by the shop and asked Dale to work on the van. During their interaction, Don also asked Dale to come with him to Costa Rica to help on his land, further indicating that Don was fully committed to a southward trip. Dale declined, and the van situation became just another dead end in a case full of questions without answers. Many people associated with the case believe the van is a sign that Don was kidnapped, and not a sign that he left on his own accord. Detectives agree, thinking the van was planted at the airport either to simply get rid of it or to make investigators think it was Don's final stop. Regardless, the amount of time it took authorities to analyze the insides of the van for forensics creates a massive what-if in the search for Don, and it is sadly the biggest clue they've received to date, one which may have been regrettably squandered. With the facts of the case understood, now let's turn to the dominant theories in the case of the disappearance of Don Lewis. Like so many cold cases around the world, the disappearance of Don Lewis has been the fodder for some truly outlandish claims and conspiracies sparked by both family members and those with disdain for Don's former partners. Sadly, these brash and borderline barbaric theories have been glamorized and focused on by one particular documentary series and its ensuing publicity. So we will do our best to dissect each theory with clarity and reasoning backed by evidence to properly respect the facts of the case and the man who went missing. It's our belief that truth and respect to the facts of the case should always take precedence, and it is insulting to Don Lewis's memory and potentially damaging to his case to sacrifice these in the pursuit of an over-dramatized quote-unquote good story. The first real theory purported by those involved with Don Lewis's personal life came from his daughters and his first ex-wife, Gladys Lewis Cross, in 1998, only 1 year after Don went missing. They made a public interview in People magazine, theorizing that Carol Baskin had indeed killed Don, and then disposed of his body via a meat grinder, and then feeding it to her tigers at the Big Cat Rescue Sanctuary. Daughters felt the police didn't do a thorough enough job searching the property, and should have carried out forensic analysis on Carol's meat grinder, testing it for Don's DNA. Carol has vehemently denied such possibilities, claiming the meat grinder in question was too small to even handle something like a human hand, let alone an entire full-grown adult male body. Not only this, but what many people fail to realize and what one documentary fails to make widely known is that the meat grinder in question was removed from the Big Cat Rescue weeks before Don went missing, confirmed by the sheriff's office investigating Don's case. And if Carol did try to use a corpse as food for her big cats, there's absolutely no way bones and forensic evidence would not be left behind. The acidity of a tiger's stomach is strong, but not strong enough to completely destroy human remains. There would be a significant amount of bones, blood, and tissue left over, and to try to clean up every bit of the leftovers and leave absolutely no hints of the act is too far-fetched to believe. Such a vile act, even if utilized, would leave behind too much evidence, and investigators certainly would have picked up on something. Nevertheless, these outlandish claims only picked up steam when notorious big cat collector and nemesis of Carol Baskin, Joe Exotic, created an obscene music video flaunting the tiger feeding hypothesis. But that wasn't his only crazy claim. Joe Exotic became obsessed with another theory that while Carol was still responsible for her husband's disappearance, she actually hid his body under the ground at Big Cat Rescue, digging up the dirt where her septic tank rested, and putting Don's body in that, covering it up, and pretending as if nothing had happened. Joe made many public pleas for investigators to excavate the earth around the property and check the septic tank. And this idea spread around his own exotic zoo where employees began believing that same conclusion. However, the documentaries covering Joe and his theories also failed to share the information that debunks his theory as well. The septic tank in question, in a similar vein to the meat grinder, was not installed on the Big Cat Rescue Sanctuary until multiple years after Don went missing. If Don was buried somewhere on the property, it was nowhere near the septic tank. In addition, it makes little sense for Carol to bury Don on her own property, where future digs and construction work will almost assuredly take place and risk discovery. Now, all this being said, to completely remove Carol Baskin as a suspect would be premature. While she has consistently denied any involvement, there are pieces to her past that might suggest a motive, or at least further consideration. The major piece of the case that might preclude motivation for Carol is Don's promiscuity, an overall stance on the wildlife projects he and Carol had created. It is well known that Don saw the tigers and various big cats as nothing more than a business, and thought of it as a means to make money rather than any real charity. While they were initially together in that viewpoint, Carol eventually wanted the sanctuary to be exactly that, a place where rescued cats could live approved by fellow activists, saving them from immoral breeding and cub abuse. This requires a lot of money, and Carol had Don to fall back on. Some in Don's inner circle said he hated losing his money to her spending, and that being a millionaire married to someone without much money is a treacherous combination. But we mustn't pretend that Don was perfect either. He was also involved in various extramarital affairs, having multiple girlfriends despite his marriage to Carol, including a secret mistress down in Costa Rica. With a clashing philosophy and a dying marriage, Carol may have sought to end what was becoming a toxic situation. In fact, pages from her personal diaries exposed by various sources found entries written by Carol stating things such as, quote, "I wish there was some way out of her relationship with Don, not to mention her verbal threats." Eventually, her wish was granted, and most suspiciously of all, Carol Baskin did end up the biggest beneficiary of Don's vanishing. Not long after he went missing, Carol cut off all the utilities to Don's office, took out his wills and powers of attorney, and held on to them until the very first date she was allowed to declare him legally dead, the 5-year and 1-day anniversary of his disappearance. Even stranger was that when the powers of attorney were read, lawyers found that a special clause had been written granting Carol head of Don's estates, not after his death, but specifically after his disappearance. Multiple lawyers have said this is an irregular clause for such legal documents, as people rarely expect to disappear. Not only that, but Carol ended up inheriting 90% of Don's worth, leaving just 10% behind for Don's former family. Now it should be stated that Don had instructed Carol to leave them with 0%, that she decided to help them regardless, citing their blood relationship to Don as meaningful. Does the strange disappearance clause in Don's will, combined with his infidelity and strict business-minded pursuits, make Carol the killer? No. But it does raise suspicion in her motivations, as $1 million were at stake to keep her dream of saving big cats alive. Some have pointed out that just because she had Don legally declared dead the first day possible doesn't mean she was the mastermind either. And they have a point. Wouldn't it be ridiculously obvious to carry out such a suspicious legal action? If Carol was indeed at fault, drawing attention to the matter wouldn't be her priority. It's also possible that she wasn't the killer, but rather had blood on her hands, arranging for someone else to handle Don. It is undoubtedly deeply suspicious. There are many people afraid of Carol, including Don himself, but fear, circumstantial evidence, and speculation unfortunately does not mean the party is guilty without physical evidence. Of course, Carol Baskin isn't the only one subject to theories of involvement. In fact, many people wonder if Don wasn't involved with anything malicious or any third party at all, but rather left on his own accord or died trying to do so. With his vast resources and $1 million, Don certainly had the capital necessary to pull off a stunt and escape his previous life. Perhaps he was done with the big cat operation and the hassle of dealing with such a consuming business. Perhaps his affairs with women were catching up with him, and he wanted to start over. Or perhaps he was truly fearful of Carol, and set up his estate so she would profit over his disappearance while he got to start over on the far side of the world. These theorists believe Don faked a kidnapping, fully intending to fly out of Miami that August morning and never return. He could have put his van in a different airport parking lot to throw police off his trail, hopped on another flight, and vanished in the blink of an eye. It's not out of the realm of possibility that Don had money outside of his known estate, or was saving up for this exact scenario. Don was full of secrets, and constantly plotting his next move, preparing for the future better than most. In fact, Don's personal handyman, Kenny Farr, told reporters he knew Don would bury money in gold bars around his various properties, and was probably worth around $20 million, $15 million more than his lawyers thought. Remember that Kenny was the person Don told, quote, if I can pull this off, it will be the slickest thing I've ever done in my life. Could it have been a great escape plan? Many think it to be possible, but not Kenny. He doesn't understand why Don would leave a van at an airport at all, even if it wasn't the right one. It would be too big a clue that Don was running away and make it much harder to become invisible. Both Don's lawyer, Joseph Fritz, and lead investigator of Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, John Marcicano, agree, saying Don was more likely to have been killed. The other arguments that Don left on his own will, but perished unexpectedly, is also heavily gossiped. Some followers of the case, including Carol Baskin herself, think that Don may have got into one of his planes to fly to Costa Rica, but crashed somewhere in the ocean. There is, however, a lot of evidence to suggest this is false. Detective Marcicano points to the lack of flight records going to Costa Rica that day and the lack of crash reports in the area for the same timeline. Theorists then report that Don was a known illegal flyer, having lost his pilot's license, but choosing to fly anyway, operating his planes low and under radar detection. Yet again, Detective Marcicano refutes these claims, saying every plane Don owned was far too small to make the trip to Costa Rica in one go. If Don did get in a plane and attempt to travel south, it would have been desperate and unsafe, possibly hinting at a deteriorating state of mind that some have claimed that Don was suffering from before he disappeared. As previously noted, Don was experiencing symptoms of onset dementia and may have been overcome with fatigue, paranoia, or a combination of the two. This would explain his ramblings to his friends about being in fear for his life and constantly looking over his shoulder, conspiring against his then-wife, Carol. The problem with this theory, though, is that if Don was truly dealing with memory loss and dementia, he would not be able to successfully vanish without a trace so easily. If his mental faculties were becoming compromised, surely he would have made a mistake somewhere. Plus, a lot of close associates to Don don't believe the dementia stories anyway, saying he was of sound mind and honestly genuinely terrified for his life. So if it doesn't appear that Carol killed Don, and it wasn't Don who left by choice, who was responsible for his disappearance? A few people think Joe Exotic was actually the one to blame, wondering if he may have taken Don out to spite Carol and derail the future of wildlife on Easy Street, claiming the validity in such a conspiracy, knowing John was guilty of other plots against Carol's life. However, it should be noted that Joe and Carol's bitter rivalry did not exist in 1997, and no such evidence supports this idea. A few others point to militant animal rights activists, or think that Don had connections to drug lords in South America that wanted him dead. Regardless, the fact of the matter is the police have no hard evidence, and have no prime suspects in their sights. Anyone could be at fault, and that's what makes Don Lewis' disappearance all the more tragic. Before we divulge our hypothesis of Don Lewis's unsolved disappearance, we want to make it known that our conclusions are purely logical speculation based on evidence, circumstance, and factual subtext. We are only privy to the same information presented in each video, and we do not promise certainty or an expert guarantee on the findings we reach in closing. We simply observe, research, and report. In the case of Don Lewis, we believe he was kidnapped, murdered, or a combination of the two. So many of the people involved with Don in his life, such as business associates, family members, his personal lawyer, and the lead investigators looking for him, believe the same to be true, that somebody or some bodies wanted Don dead, whether it be for vengeance, spite, or pure malice. The tricky part of the equation is who. Without a doubt, Don Lewis's killer was both close to him and had the resources to carry out a seamless homicide. The perpetrator had to be close to Don to know of his planned trips to Costa Rica and multiple projects down there, and be able to use that as a blind for investigators, tricking people into thinking he disappeared purposefully. Now this doesn't necessarily trim down the list of suspects because Don had a lot of friends and a lot of enemies, each of whom knew of his Costa Rica paradise. Yet it does signal the killer was smart and knew how to arrange a multifaceted kidnapping. In addition to smarts, the killer had to have the money to hire someone to get rid of Don or to do it themselves without ever leaving so much as a hair follicle. In the case of a multimillionaire like Don was, removing them from the face of the earth is going to take a pretty penny. So how did they do it? A lot is left to be desired in the investigation in terms of clues and concrete timelines. But if the killer was an associate to Don, they probably had secretly arranged a meeting early that August 18th morning with him. He was already out to make a delivery and head to Miami for a flight. So the arrangement was probably just another stop. It was here they likely kidnapped him, drove his van to the airport as a fake-out, and disposed of him elsewhere. There's also the idea that Don could be meeting someone with his own planes, and when they took off, he was pushed out over the ocean by his murderer, a theory brought up by his lawyer. Whatever the method was, it ended with a clean getaway. Could it have been Carol Baskin? It is entirely possible. In addition to the theories mentioned previously, Carol's own family had a disdain for Don. And speaking of her family, she also had a brother as a deputy in the sheriff's office, who was one of the last people to be around Don right before he went missing. Plenty of people have come forward to quickly strike down theories of collusion in law enforcement, or any involvement from Carol's brother, citing their weak relationship to begin with. Both Carol and Ann McQueen, the assistant who probably knew Don Lewis better than he knew himself, were intensely vetted by detectives, cleared of any wrongdoing, and never labeled as prime suspects. It doesn't rule them out completely, but it does give credence to the fact there is simply no lead at the forefront of the investigation. It's important to remember that at the center of the entire case is a man whose fate is unknown, the humanity and tragedy of which is sometimes obscured by the glorification of conspiracy theories and internet jokes. There are loved ones and friends of Don Lewis who are desperate for answers and longing to know what happened to him, but instead of receiving real help, they have to wake up every day to see his face and name abused by people looking to profit off his mystery and laughing at the idea that he was fed to tigers. It is so important to remember that the people in these cases were people, real people who deserve respect and justice. And the abuse of their stories to make shocking headlines and quick money is insidious. Was Don Lewis a perfect man? No, by no stretch of the imagination. He, like all of us, had his issues and shortcomings. But at the end of the day, Don Lewis was a real person with a beating heart and deserved to live out the rest of his days, no matter how badly someone didn't like him or the businesses he involved himself with. Because of the tone and reception of certain documentaries made since Don disappeared, it is hard to get people to focus on finding answers rather than supporting the nonsense. So it is up to all of us to work to progress above the overly dramatized conspiracy theories, looking to shock viewers and readers to earn quick money and humanize Jack Donald Lewis and respect his case. If you or anyone you know has any information that could assist investigators in the search for Jack Donald Lewis, please contact the relevant authorities. No detail is too small or insignificant, as it could hold the key to unraveling the chilling mystery of Don Lewis and the legacy he left behind at Wildlife on Easy Street. Thanks for watching.